Welcome to the next episode of Brandland. I'm so excited. Today I'm joined by Pablo Marvel, who's been the Chief Marketing Officer at Brown Harris Stevens for the last 2 years. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, David. Very glad to be here.
Yes, we were just before we started, we were talking a little bit about our love for all things music. If you've listened to a few episodes, I've said I play drums, and that's a love of mine. It sounds like you play guitar and dabble in a bunch of other instruments.
I'm a guitarist. I've been a guitarist for a long time. I actually wanted to try out drums at some point, but I live in a small apartment in New York City. So basically circumstance said, not this time. maybe when you move back to the country.
That's a hard big city instrument for sure. Well, great. So let's jump in. And as you mentioned, you're dialing in from New York. And I know that Brown Harris Stevens does a lot on the East Coast. But before we get into Brown Harris Stevens, I'd love to hear a little bit about your background and kind of what brought you to BHS. And let's start there.
Absolutely. Well, thanks again. And I actually grew up in New York. I'm from Manhattan. I grew up running around the streets. We would bike around. That was our thing when we were kids. We would have big bike crews late at night. But I went to college and came back afterwards, and I always wanted to do something entrepreneurial. So in my senior year of college, I actually started a drone company. This was back, when drones were like a kind of brand new and terrifying, and no one knew what they were. And when I say drone company, I meant I had a drone and a website, which effectively, for most people was enough. But when I came back from college, I thought, this would be really cool to try out. So I actually started taking photos and videos for architects and developers and a lot of real estate folks. And so over the course of 5 years, it evolved from a drone production company into a creative agency, into a full-on marketing agency where we really hit our stride. And that's when I met Brown Harris Stevens. I met Bess Friedman, who is now the CEO. And so it's middle of 2018, I guess, we were hired as a creative consultant. Bess had this great vision for sort of revamping the brand. We'll get more in detail about this, but we were brought on as creative consultants. And around that time, I was actually looking for something new. Wanted to move jobs, and Bess and I came up with this plan that I would come on as the chief marketing officer, really with the specific goal of reinvigorating the brand, revamping it, and taking what is a huge and incredibly well-known, well-respected 150-year-old company and hauling it into the modern era. And so 6 months later, there I was on the team. And actually, it was funny. Most people at the company thought that they thought I was an app or some kind of new platform for a long time. They're like, Pablo, who's this new? We hadn't had any leadership changes in a long time. So like, what is Pablo? Is this some app we're supposed to download?
That's great.
Hi guys, it's me.
It's me. New person.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah. Great to hear that story. So let's kind of keep diving in. One of the things that we want to talk about is this idea of like disrupting yourself. You like the term marketing like a startup. Walk me through some of, like, as you came into BHS, what were the things that you were brought in to do, and how did you go about, getting the lay of the land, understanding like what steps to take? You just kind of let's dive in there.
Yeah. Well, so the reason that I thought this would be a great thing to talk about today, disrupting yourself, specifically marketing and thinking like a startup, is because the basic mindset is you have to be willing to let go of the way things have been done and try out new things. And for larger, older companies in particular, it's really hard, mostly because they become bureaucratic, they sort of become set in their ways. And the other thing is that usually if they've been around that long, whatever they've been doing works, right? But the world continues to change. It's changing now faster than ever, especially in marketing. Online things that people are doing are completely different than they were even a few years ago. So the mission really was, okay, let's leave this a little open-ended, but we need to sort of brush up the brand, right? A lot of our demographic is some of the older generation of buyers and sellers. So we want to really make sure we're connecting with younger younger folks in the next generation, and then also like what tools can we bring in, what new strategies and stuff like that. And so coming from my position running a startup before, it was really, it was a perfect setup because you have, you're not going from 0 to 1 at a startup. You have this huge platform, but if you're able to employ the same tactics and, what we effectively call disrupt yourself, theoretically before someone else does it, you should get the best of both. And so, for example, things that we set up right out of the gates looking at was internal tech tools, like how are business processes being done, especially on the marketing side, but extending to all kinds of different teams and departments within. And then the marketing itself, I mean, perhaps unsurprisingly for a very large, older company, but especially in real estate, most of the marketing was done on paper and in print. So that was probably one of my biggest challenges, was convincing people that New York Times ads and postcards were perhaps a good way of doing it, but there were other options that were going to get a wider reach than just direct mailing. So that was sort of the mission at hand.
For sure. How did you approach? I know like change is hard. What steps did you take to kind of champion that change and kind of get people on board?
Yeah,
I know that's. I mean, change is hard.
Change is hard, and this, I think the biggest challenge by far was changing the culture and changing the mindset, right? Because there were cases where, for example, we'd do pilot programs of, digital ads coming through, or, focus on lead gen, stuff like that. And you'd have the metrics, but to really like take people who have been doing something a certain way for a long time and get them to completely pivot took a lot more than just showing metrics and results, right? So my primary focus, and this is where I think, a lot of startups win over old companies, is because they focus so much on culture and creating excitement internally, right? So a huge focus of mine was the marketing team itself, right? And I probably should clarify, in real estate in particular, it's different for every industry, but with real estate specifically, you actually have two clientele. You have your brokers, right? Mm-hmm. Because they're independent contractors who join a brokerage, and then you have the market. So the marketing team had a incredibly hard challenge, and a very specific one, which is that we had two primary audiences we had to satisfy. So first steps first, and my team, if you ask any of them, they're so sick of hearing me say this, but I would always say process over product, right? Let's forget all the products we have, forget the way you've been doing things, what you've been doing, and focus on the process, right? And let's get excited about it. Let's get new ideas in. Let's forget that we're a real estate company for a second, and everyone bring in your favorite kind of, marketing, your favorite content piece that you've seen, and just tell me what excites you as the marketing team. Because if you're excited and you're producing all this content and you're trying to get the brokers, to back it and distribute it to their clients, the more excited you are, the more you believe in it, that is really what's going to push that out. So, you can assign metrics to this. In fact, I think the sort of sum of all of our achievements started with what we called the morale meter, but really making sure that the team felt like they were at a startup where, there was rewards for design challenges, or, all kinds of fun stuff that you see sort of stereotypically in startups. Making sure that they were on board with that completely changed the way that they came into work every day. And it wasn't just like working for another big company. New ideas were flying around left and right, half of which actually made it to the content campaigns. So I would say that was the biggest challenge of getting the culture shifted.
For sure. So I heard marketing technology kind of at the start of this, and then also it seems like marketing tactics all across the board. How did this relate to like the brand? Was there any big branding decisions and kind of weave throughout that change?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's, that was also probably one of the bigger challenges as well, of taking a legacy brand and heritage brand and getting basically buy-in from the brokers who then go represent that, And I think nowadays brands that they do change all the time. I'll give you an example. One of my favorite sort of brand transformations was the New York Times. So they did this incredibly graceful transformation over the last handful of years from a sort of heavyweight old school company to a very flashy, very modern, but respectable classic brand. And I'd say, most of their business, well over the majority of their business now comes from digital subscription, right? So it's both an external and an internal thing. But so we would look at examples like that and do case studies and say, okay, what is it about this that we like? And we did pinups with brands that were, we felt representative of our aspirations, pushing the envelope a little bit, but not so radical that one day our colors were orange and the next day were, purple, right?
Yeah.
But anyway, with the brand itself, the concept we landed on, which I think, a lot of brands, especially of our sort of size and caliber, can relate to, was this idea of a modern classic where you can have this luxury lifestyle, right? You can have this sort of very elegant nature, but it's not going to go right over a 35-year-old's head because they associate it with their grandparents. And so once we were able to produce content that was exciting to the execs, it was exciting to the brokers, it was a lot easier with their buy-in to then use more traditional marketing to get it out into the public and get buy-in from from our secondary audience, the consumer.
Yeah. Can you kind of give the lay of the land with the marketing team just to kind of understand how that's structured? Who's part of that team?
Absolutely. Yeah. So as I mentioned before, so, when I got there, I'd say probably 75, 80% of the effort was going towards print materials, and also this idea of, each listing is a prototype, right? So every time you get a listing in, we would do this whole custom thing. And while it's great to put in a lot of effort and a lot of care to each listing, there's a lot of stuff that can sort of be automated or templated out, stuff like that. So what went from a 10-person team where one person was handling all the social media and basically everyone else was handling, just agent care or print materials, we expanded to about 30 people that we had a full stack digital marketing team that worked with an agency we brought on. We had an email team. We had a lot of sort of concierge services, print. We built a content studio, which was a huge hit, and really sort of leaned into dynamic content with motion graphics that was going to do a lot more than just sell properties, build our brand awareness on social, be able to embed that in email campaigns that we're doing really well, to give it some life, right? Without diluting the brand at all. And the best part was that the brokers, took us a couple of tries in the first one, but they ended up loving this. And when you have content that feels good and feels representative of the brand, they became our secondary marketing team, right? Yeah. So if you can activate your audience, right? If you can activate the people you're speaking to share your content and be a ambassador promotion for you, that's a huge win.
Yeah. I'm intrigued. The content studio, was that an internal resource for the brokers to then be able to then use the content in there for external purposes? Is that what that was?
Absolutely. Yeah. So when, in my past life, we had to be incredibly scrappy. And I think it's always fun to talk about what you could never do or think about what you never had, so that one day when you have the budget to do all these crazy things, it sort of, it feels like you really crossed the plane there. But, we learned how to set up a full production set that on camera looked like we rented a $20,000 studio with basically a sheet of paper in a quiet conference room that we took over for the afternoon. But that's sort of the beauty of being able to be scrappy and feel like, okay, just because I work at this huge company doesn't mean I have to overpay vendors for everything we do. Like, we literally bought a seamless, the paper thing, got 2 cameras, a lighting kit studio. I hired one guy who came from the production world. So he was sort of running the whole thing. And we got a couple brokers in there that everyone at the company really liked and respected, and got them to do these little, almost like vlog episodes about their listings or their life or whatever. Just had fun with it. Put
Yep.
out these 30-second pieces, and it was like, oh my God, actually the CFO called me like a week later. He's like, what are you like spending a ton of money and like hiring like camera crews and stuff? I'm like, maybe no. Um, but I think just being able to be resourceful, leverage, tools in your back pocket, and also know how to leverage like freelancers. A
Yep.
number of projects we did, we would just go on Upwork and get a freelancer to help us with one project. If it was worth continuing on and doing it again, we'd either bring them on full time or hire out for that position. But it's all about being resourceful and being very iterative with the content we were producing.
Yeah. One thing I'm thinking about, I'm trying to think through how to articulate it. Like you're mentioning all these little pieces of things that you did that roll up to this larger story of what you were trying to do and how you're trying to move the organization. Kind of, I guess, walk me through at like that high level. How did you make sure all these pieces fit together in the direction you were heading, if that makes sense?
Absolutely. It's a great question. I mean, the overall mission was basically we need to sort of revamp the brand, right? And that you can do it in a couple photo shoots and mood boards and make sure
Yep.
everyone agrees on that. Then there's your content strategy, right? And so for us, we called this the perhaps a little clunky, but throwing educated pasta at the wall, right? And that for me was the best way to sort of get buy-in to this idea that we're going to use data to inform our set of decisions, right? We're not just going to be sort of like, oh, what if we try this? But one thing that the startup world is able to do is try new ideas really quickly and let your audience sort of inform your decisions, right? So our content strategy was basically, we know what we want it to look like, but we don't have to know right now exactly what that content is going to be. Every time we put out a campaign, we're going to put 5 campaigns out, see which one works in the first week or two or whatever, pull back the rest and run with that, right? And that's a sort of agile strategy. It's not unfamiliar in the startup world, but if you have this bigger company that's able to leverage that effectively, you're going to see a difference the night and day.
Yeah.
The third was really hammering in on feedback, right? So to answer your question, the new sort of structure that was in place was this top to bottom, very agile, very malleable content and marketing strategy that said, okay, we're going to produce content for brokers, produce content for the brand, and of course measure it so that overall we can lift engagement, leads, sales, standard there.
Yeah. Did you have any spectacular fails?
Oh my God. Name your pick. I think.
I mean, I could ask about wins, but I think it's we as marketers, it's fun to hear failures because we're like, oh yeah, it's not just me.
Well, I think the biggest fail was probably incidentally coming out of the content studio, where we learned that not everyone was camera ready, and just because they got excited about it, there was still a little bit of curation that we had to manage. I mean, we did a couple of these videos that came out, everyone got really excited about it, and then the next week there was a line of brokers out the door who wanted to use the studio, and we sort of put the program on autopilot. This guy was just cranking these videos out, and I saw one day I saw a video that hit me on social. It was a ad that we had run featuring one of these brokers, and I started cracking up because I was like, what company is putting this out? Like, this is crazy. Who would run it as a content campaign? And then I looked at the handle, and it was ours.
And it was you. Oh.
We had to pull the plug on just the free form content studio, but it's okay. Yeah. You learn one.
I love that. I'm looking kind of some of our talking points, and one thing that stuck out to me is this idea of radical optimism.
Yeah.
And like being bold. Can you talk to me like how did that play out in your with your team and how you ran some of this change?
Well, first of all, there's the idea that to be successful, you in whatever you're doing, you got to be willing to eat rejection for lunch, right? Eat failure for lunch, and sometimes breakfast if you have the stomach for it. But um, radical optimism is what I call the willingness to look a totally failed campaign in the face and say, what did we learn from this? Rather than we need, a new management or a new, people working on this or a totally new strategy. And so the idea that, being bold is going to get you over the line, that sounds good to everyone. When you have to justify it with a budget and, putting content on the internet that is by all means bold, a lot of people get sheepish about it. And so a big part of our, sort of transformation was inching up to it and saying, okay, this is a little bit over the line, feels good. It worked, always obviously having metrics to back up your successes works. But if you look at the sort of bold content we were putting out in month 3 of when I was there versus at the end of year 2, it's night and day. And I'll give you an example of my favorite campaign we did that was definitely bold was a newsletter we put out. We started the email program probably about a year into my time there. And at the sort of, peak of when we were getting all these new subscribers and really had a ton of great momentum on this, we decided to launch a newsletter called The Line, which is still going. And The Line was a very sort of information-driven, data-driven newsletter about the economy, about home sales in our regions, about jobless claims during the pandemic, which tends to be really dry content, right? It's not it's not like everyone's favorite thing to read about unless you're interested. But it was being written by our chief economist, who is an absolutely hilarious guy. And so the success was saying, you know what, you just write it as if you were giving a wedding toast, like just be crazy with it. And so the newsletters ended up being like totally tongue in cheek, like really like almost laugh out loud. We would get email responses from brokers and consumers alike who were reading this and saying like, I still don't really get the information, but this was so funny, or like, he'd make references to all kinds of things. And that was a very different persona than all of our execs were used to at this sort of very buttoned up, very prestigious brand.
Yep.
And it ended up being one of our most successful drivers of engagement and actually leads as well. So there you go.
I feel like those, thinking to just, teams I've worked on, those are like the things that everyone wants to do, but is just scared to try, because it is being bold. It's kind of, it's pushing things. I like that example.
I would always say, the things, there's probably a list scratched under someone's desk at the office of things they're sick of hearing me saying. But the other was, basically motion is more important than direction if you don't know exactly where you're trying to get, right? And going and just kind of tying our questions together here, one way to really invigorate your team, get them engaged, and another way to try out a lot of new ideas in an effort to get to this final destination is just keep moving, keep trying things. Like if the humorous, economic newsletter had been a failure, I wouldn't necessarily be talking about it right now, but it would be one of many things that we had tried along the way. And so the idea was just, if you don't know exactly where you need to get, just go. And over time, the final destination will make itself apparent, and you can pivot and sort of course correct to get there. But just try new things, be bold. If it really backfires, then pull back a little bit, right? But a lot of marketing teams, I think, get sort of stuck and paralyzed by this idea that, well, if our sales dip by 5%, like my job is on the line, or we're going to lose market share, and sometimes you got to take a step back or a step sideways to take a bigger step forward.
Yeah. I think one thing I'm also hearing in your stories is this idea of being human and having like a human brand, and kind of plays out in that email newsletter you're talking about. That, how does that play out at BHS, the idea of like being human, and why do you feel like that's important?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one example was the sort of humorous newsletter, but another, much more serious, sober, let's say, and also, um, a sort of series of events that I think completely sort of changed everyone's mindset was marketing through the pandemic. And at the onset, we had a sort of big brainstorm about, okay, well, how are we going to address this? What's our tone? And over the course of a few weeks, we saw a lot of brands like trying to sell through the pandemic or sort of capture people's attention through what you might call cheap tricks, just to still get them on the website and preserve sales. And, we were like, oh, should we try this? Everyone's gut reaction was, that's pretty insane and uncomfortable, right? So we still put out a ton of content throughout the pandemic, but I'd say 90% of it was like community advocacy and work with, brokers or people who are like actually doing actionable things. I think we featured like 3 apartments during the entire like 6-month sort of
Yeah.
heavy, part of the pandemic there. But so that was it was really important. And we said, we have to be human here because right now, no one gives a crap about buying or selling anything.
Yeah.
But other examples is just like in the general tone of marketing at large nowadays. I think the consumer nowadays is so finely tuned into sales BS that unless you like have an authentic story and stand by it, then people are going to be like, all right, this is just like a sort of generic thing. I'm not that interested. Any company, whether you're selling vacuums or I would say if you're selling socks or stocks, doesn't matter. You have a personality and lean into it, show people who you are, and they will reward you with their attention and dollars eventually.
Yeah. Great example. People want to interact with people, and that's where you build a lot of trust.
Yeah. And that's not to say, by the way, I mean, one word I've been trying to avoid using in this episode is data. I think it's, quickly becoming an unfriendly buzzword, but everything I'm talking about can start and end with data-driven decisions, right? Like when I say be human in your marketing, it doesn't mean you have to wear a baseball cap on, CNBC if you're getting interviewed. It's more about just like being intelligent. I think the smartest people that we listen to are ones who can take very complex ideas and say it in the most simple terms.
Yeah.
And then use, your standard stack of online marketing tools to blast it out. And you can get much better results because it'll resonate much deeper with people. But don't be afraid to sound a little unbuttoned when you're talking to your consumer nowadays, I would say.
Yeah. Great examples. So I'm curious, where's BHS now, and like what does that mean for you? I know before we were talking a little bit about how your role is shifting. I'd love for you to kind of give us some insight there.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so I joined, just to kind of come full circle here, I joined with a very specific mission. And the result of that mission was that we actually saw a huge improvement on all of our metrics. There was a big brand lift that we picked up on social media. Our website traffic increased significantly. We actually ended up going through a merger as well. So it was probably one of the most fast-paced 2 years of my entire career, despite the fact that I was at this very large and established company. But I'd say one of the biggest achievements that we just sort of closed the book on was launching an internal platform that my team sort of oversaw the development of this tech platform for the agents to use, right? So really facilitating all of their internal needs, whether it's marketing requests, accounting, stuff like that. So once we sort of officially put that boat out to sea, I've now stepped back into a consulting role. We have a 12 to 18 month roadmap of what needs to happen just to make sure that we don't lose momentum on that. But my passion is sort of being this sort of agent of change, if you want to call it something cheesy, and coming in to these brands that have a great platform and have a lot of resources, but need someone to sort of come in from the outside and really, effectively steer the ship by degrees, so that the long-term outcome is more sustainable and they keep growing. So I'm doing some consulting projects now. I still work almost every day with BHS, and it's been great. And it's been a lot of fun to see change happen on all fronts, internal, external, all the above.
For sure. Yeah, and that's a really good success story to paint a picture of what can be done. Well, as we wrap up, where, if people want to reach out to you, to connect with you, if they have follow-up questions, what's the best way to get in touch with you?
Absolutely. I think LinkedIn is the best. You can just look me up on LinkedIn, Pablo Marvel. I think there's not that many. And if there are, then, be friendly, say hey to them. Yeah, LinkedIn, I keep a close eye on that.
Well, great. Pablo, thanks so much for spending the time sharing the stories, the ups, the downs, and what a neat success story. And I hope that this is encouraging and exciting for listeners to follow along with that story. So thanks so much.
Likewise. Talk soon.